All right, tonight is February 9th, 2016, and tonight is about the division, right? Human beings exist because they have a vision. If they don't have a vision of the future, is it really worth existing? That's the question. So, the vision I'm going to talk about is something that goes back to the European Renaissance. It goes back to Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa, who lived in the 1400s, and it goes back to Leonardo da Vinci, who lived a little later than Cardinal Cusa. They believed, and they had a vision, that humanity, if developed properly, could begin to make discoveries. And those discoveries would give humanity the ability to improve not only the conditions of life, but ultimately create such conditions of life where the vast majority of people who were living pretty much as animals in a peasant society, in a feudal society, could be elevated in their capacities, in their existence. The very few people who had leisure in those days had the advantage of having those capacities. But the economy of those days could not provide, in terms of surplus, due to the level of technology and culture, that only a very few people could have that leisure to develop. And it was the vision of Cusa and later Brunelleschi, and Da Vinci, and later Kepler, and most of all Leibniz, 150 years later, 200 years later, that began to look at how it is that we can create the abundance far surpassing what existed at that time. And it became obvious that the only way to do that was to create the means by which human labor could do the work of dozens of people, of tens of people. And that can only be done by creating sources of power and machines. And this was understood by Da Vinci. But he never had available to him in his designs that kind of capability. This was understood by Kepler later on, who even wrote about voyages to the moon based on his understanding and his breakthroughs in understanding how the solar system was composed. So here you have a guy going into the early 1600s who had a vision of traveling into space, traveling because he understood the solar system as a real physical object, not as an astronomical system, but as an actual physical object that was organized according to principles which he discovered. Following Kepler, Leibniz developed what became known the term technology. And the issue of steam power began to be developed. And ultimately, steam power was combined with machines to create the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. And the man most responsible in organizing that is none other than the founder of the United States, Benjamin Franklin. And these people had a vision. They had a vision of freeing the mass of humanity from the drudgery, from the poverty, from the bestiality of their material circumstances. They did not believe that the fate of mankind into the future should be forever that of peasants and slaves and chattel. They believed that the power of science, the power of new discoveries could create the economic platform to develop and raise people so that they could better develop the powers of the human powers. This was their vision. And this later became the vision of some of the founders of our nation, of the United States. However, some of the other founders of our nation, of the United States, didn't subscribe to that vision. They preferred to have a continuation of slavery and perpetuate slavery. But this was a vision that most informed individuals like John Quincy Adams and later Abraham Lincoln. So, how you realize this vision? Well, what Lincoln realized, and what others like Lincoln, but especially Lincoln realized, is that you don't really have a country if you can't connect that country in an efficient way. Traveling by buggy, traveling by horseback, traveling by covered wagon, or having to go around the Cape, going around South America, or having to go through the Isthmus of Panama without a canal, or even with a canal, that is not an efficient means of transportation. At the time, railways were being developed based on steam. And the idea was that you could connect the nation by rail, transforming the world in which you live. You can now, in a matter of days, cross a vast expanse that in the past would have took you months at best. You could now have access to the entire rail. And this vision of Lincoln, which began to be realized in the Transcontinental Railway, this vision caught on in the rest of the world. And based on that vision, the Russian Tsar in the latter part of the 1800s built the Trans-Siberian Railway with the help of the United States. And China was looking into this vision. And Germany wanted to partake of this vision by building a railway from Cairo to Cape Town, or from the Suez Canal to Cape Town. And Germany also wanted to build a railway from Berlin to Baghdad through the Balkans, developing the Balkans, developing the entire area. But the empire, the British Empire, the Maritime Empire, would have none of it. They would not allow the emerging industrial power of Europe to be the engine for the development of Asia and Africa. Nor did they want the emerging industrial power of the United States be the engine for the development of Latin America. This had to be stopped. There were assassinations. There were intrigue. There were campaigns to derail all of this. Lincoln was assassinated. Garfield was assassinated. McKinley was assassinated. All to stop this vision, to crush this vision. And after Bismarck was forced out of his position of Chancellor of Germany, games began to be played, and ultimately you had World War I, then you had World War II, and then you had the Cold War, and now you have this other war coming. All to crush the vision of the potential of humanity to use these kind of transportation corridors to create the means for connection and development, and to bypass the power of the empire using the sea lanes. But that vision didn't die. Who has this vision now? The Chinese. And after the horrors of the Cultural Revolution and a century of civil war and a century before that of being dominated by colonial powers, the Chinese have emerged with that vision, with the help of Lyndon LaRouche and Helga LaRouche. They have emerged with the same vision that Lincoln had, called the One Belt, One Road, called the Silk Road, to connect all of Eurasia down into Africa, and to connect Eurasia and Africa to North and South America through the Bering Strait Tunnel, to create the capacity to change the global economic space so that hundreds and millions and billions of human beings can develop the productive power to be able to sustain a life that heretofore not many people, relatively speaking, have been able to sustain. This was also the vision of Kennedy and FDR, and Kennedy was killed. So the vision is alive in China, is alive in Russia, it's now alive in India, and it's growing all over the world through the BRICS, the New Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment, the Shanghai Cooperation Bank. All of these entities are entities which are now increasingly becoming committed to the same vision that Lincoln had and that Kennedy was the last to have in our country. Early in the 1900s, the Wright brothers did something very spectacular. They demonstrated the capacity to fly. In the 1920s, a group of Germans, young rocket scientists, began to have the vision of going outside, this vision Kepler had, of going outside of the planet, going into space. And they dedicated themselves to developing the technology to do that. And ultimately, they got incorporated into the war machine of Nazi Germany, and after that, some of them went to the Soviet Union, and some of them went to the United States, and were at the core of our space program and our military rocket program. But they were determined to extend man into space, to transform the human being from being an earthly peasant to being somebody whose mind stretches out into the solar system, into the galaxy, and begins the process of harnessing what can be harnessed from space. And this is a different sense of identity. This is the vision that emerged and came to rightness under Kennedy and the space program here. But then it got shut down. It got destroyed. The Soviet Union fell, and their space program also suffered. But where is this vision coming back? It's coming back with China. They've gone to the moon. And they're going to keep going to the moon. They're going to be going to the far side of the moon. They're going to be extracting helium-3 from the moon and bringing it back as they develop fusion. This very vision that Kennedy had is now gripping China and is spreading back into the nations that had once felt that this was not possible, that the space program was shut down, basically. Shut down by Obama more recently. The Constellation program was shut down. So this vision is alive. This idea of humanity extending beyond into the universe is also the idea of the true nature of man, which is the creative nature of man. Also at the turn of the century, You had scientists like the Curies, Madame Curie, and Einstein, and Becquerel, and Planck, Max Planck, who began to discover the power of the atom. And they had a vision. The vision of harnessing the power of the atom such that you could vastly supersede the power of oil or coal. You could vastly supersede in the power. This is the power to go into space. This is the power to no longer be dependent on the Earth's resources, but to create your own resource. This is power. Nuclear power and fusion power. And this emerged in the Eisenhower Atoms for Peace process. And it got crushed. It got crushed. Nuclear power, the hysteria created around Bertrand Russell about the threat of nuclear power, war, was then used to destroy the faith in progress, and then that was used to destroy the possibility of developing nuclear power. So every effort has been made to crush this vision. No nuclear, no fusion, no, we must have solar and windmills. No, 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 no. We are not going nuclear. We're going to solar and windmills. To crush the vision of the future. To make human beings little. But that vision still exists. It's coming back. It's coming back with China. They just did a fusion experiment where they kept a plasma at 50 million degrees for 120 seconds. This is only the beginning. The Chinese have now the vision, and that vision is now coming to Russia and to India and to all of Southeast Asia and to all of Africa and possibly even to all of Latin America. That is the vision that we once had, which we no longer have. So we are in a crisis, aren't we? We, the people of the United States, are in a crisis. We have turned against what was our best nature. And now we see our best nature coming back with other people, foreigners, Chinese, Russian, Indian. These people that we once thought were so backward are now rushing forward with the same vision that we once had, that we once were excited with. So what does this mean? Does this mean we're going to have our vision back? Are we going to have the vision back? Are we going to be rekindled in what was once our vision? Are we going to be snarling, hateful, and say those people don't deserve it, and rain upon them war, rain upon them nuclear weapons to stop their vision, the vision that we once believed in, that we once wanted? Is that what we're going to do? What would you rather have? You who are watching this, would you rather see those countries develop unlimited economic power that we could also have, or do you want to stop it? Do you want to crush them? Where do you stand on this? I know where Obama stands on this. He wants to crush it. I know where George Bush, the Bush family stands on it. They want to crush it. I know where the royal family stands on it. They want to crush it. But that's not the issue. The issue is you. Do you want to crush it? Or do you want to join it? You want to revive it? That's the issue. Now, not one presidential candidate has an iota of this vision represented in the platitudes of their politic. Not one of them. It's all about saving Wall Street. It's all about saving the image of greatness, which doesn't exist anymore. It's all about pretend. They have no vision. Hillary and Sanders, they got no vision. And the Republicans have no vision. Do they want to revive this vision in the United States? No. Do they want to take on Wall Street? Shut down Wall Street so we can get the economic policy required to fulfill this vision? No. The one candidate who seemed to want to seriously do this is no longer in the race. His name is Martin O'Malley. So, who are you going to vote for? There's nobody to vote for. Oh, I like Bernie Sanders. He's for Glass-Steagall. He's for FDR. No, he's not. He's not for that. He says he is. But he wouldn't know how to carry it out. Because you have to go to war with Wall Street to carry it out. You have to risk assassination to carry it out. You have to go to the people and give them a vision. You can't just go to them and say 1% of the population is screwing you over and you need to get it from them. The inequality between the 1% and the 99%, that's not going to solve the problem. That's not a vision. Class conflict is not a vision. There is no vision there. It's like, vote for me. I'm going to go after Wall Street. But there's no vision. There's no policy there. And it's doubtful he would ever do that. Because he's not serious. And Hillary is owned completely now by Wall Street. And all the Republicans are owned by Wall Street. And guess what? Wall Street's coming down. It's crashing. It's collapsing. It's going under. The whole system is going to go under. Where's the vision? What is the future? Yeah, we need to have Glass-Steagall, sure. That's the first step. But what's the vision beyond that? Do these people have any vision beyond that? No, they don't. Do they want to join with China, Russia, and India in a world of plenty? In a world of development? In a future where we can raise the living standards of the world beyond our wildest dreams over the next century? No. Nobody has that vision. What happened? Do you have that vision? That's the question. And are you willing to fight for that vision? You have no excuse. Look what the Chinese people have gone through. Under Mao and the Cultural Revolution. Under Civil War. Under Japanese occupation. And then before that, British and colonial. And the opium. The massive doping up of their population. They've been through this stuff before. But they have a vision now. And it was our vision. So that's the issue. And I'm with Lyndon LaRouche because he has a vision. And I have that vision too. And we helped get the Chinese to get that vision. So as we go into the New Hampshire Super Tuesday and all of the stuff, all these things that are happening in the elections, it means absolutely nothing. The very underpinnings of this whole process is coming down. And not one candidate is standing out and saying what has to be said or saying anything that has any meaning. So we are going to come very soon now to this crisis, to the financial crisis and to the moment of truth. Do we as a nation unleash our nuclear arsenal to wipe out Russia, wipe out China, wipe out the world? which now has our vision, the vision we used to have? Or are we going to change who we are now and become who we were once before? That's the issue facing us. To be or not to be. That's the issue. To be what we once were, or not to be what we once were. To be what we are now, which has a certain depth to it, a certain terminus to it, a certain end to our existence. And hopefully not, but a certain possible terminal existence for the human race. It's in your hands. It became obvious that the only way to do that was to create the means by which human labor could do the work of dozens of people, of tens of people. And that can only be done by creating sources of power and machines. And this was understood by Da Vinci. But he never had available to him in his designs that kind of capability. This was understood by Kepler later on, who even wrote about voyages to the moon based on his understanding and his breakthroughs in understanding how the solar system was composed. So here you Alright, tonight is February 9th, 2016, and tonight is about the vision, right? Human beings, and those discoveries would give humanity the ability to improve not only the conditions of life, but ultimately create such conditions of life where the vast majority of people who were living pretty much as animals in a peasant society, in a feudal society, could be elevated in their capacities, in their existence. The very few people who had leisure in those days had the advantage of having those capacities, but they exist because they have a vision. If they don't have a vision of the future, is it really worth existing? That's the question. So the vision I'm going to talk about is something that goes back to the European Renaissance. It goes back to Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa, who lived in the 1400s. And it goes back to Leonardo da Vinci, who lived a little later than Cardinal Cusa. They believed, and they had a vision, that humanity, if developed properly, could begin to make discoveries. The economy of those days could not provide, in terms of surplus, due to the level of technology and culture, that only a very few people could have that leisure to develop. And it was the vision of Cusa and later Brunelleschi, and Da Da Vinci and later Kepler and most of all Leibniz 150 years later, 200 years later, that began to look at how it is that we can create the abundance far surpassing what existed at that time. And